Before we begin, we would like to remind participants that you may listen to this session in Spanish by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Queremos recordarles a todos los participantes de la Cumbre Mundial de MUN Impact que esta sesión estará disponible en español. Simplemente elijan la opción de interpretación y el canal de español para escuchar la sesión. Recuerden desactivar el audio original. No se pierdan la oportunidad de preguntar, participar y sentirse inspirados. Muchas gracias.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Nanya Balakrishnan. I'm speaking to you from New Delhi, India. On behalf of our executive team, we are so excited to have you here for our Day 2 plenary at our MUN Impact Global Summit.
Greetings, I am Nikhil Binu, and I reside in Doha, Qatar, but I was born in India.
Hello, my name is Maria Turanova, and I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, but I'm currently speaking to you from Vienna, Austria.
Please remember to be respectful and courteous to conference attendees and staff at all times, and to remember that many participants will be speaking in their non-native language.
In case you face any difficulties, have a question about your schedule, or a general question about MUN Impact, our 24/7 help room will be accessible throughout the event. A link to that will be dropped in the chat. Most importantly, we want you to make friends, create a diverse network of change makers, and take innovative ideas and knowledge back to your schools and MUN programs. We want you to be a part of the global solution to address the critical issues we face today.
On a purely practical note, we would like to remind participants that they can configure the shape of their viewing screen here in Zoom by going to the upper right corner and clicking on Speaker or Gallery View. You may choose the view option that works best on your device. Having dispensed those formalities, I would like to, on the behalf of all Summit executive staff and the MUN Impact Leadership community, officially begin today's plenary session. To kick things off, I would like to introduce my colleague, Nikhil Binu. Nikhil is one of our student executives and is part of the youth leadership team for MUN Impact. Nikhil, you have the floor.
Greetings, namaste, and privyat to the 1,600 plus students from over 100 countries around the globe. Welcome to the second day of the Global Summit held by MUN Impact. I would like to start by saying that we all have different views on what the most pressing problems of today are. And all of these problems are divided into 17 SDGs. Fortunately, most of them are being discussed today. Despite the discrepancies in our diversity, we are all citizens of Mother Earth, and being aware of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals is not enough. We must be included in them and work towards making a better world for all of us. The current pandemic restricts us from moving out and making a change. But today, we will also be talking about how we can solve or achieve SDG goals during quarantine. The pandemic and the economic downfall are challenges which we are all facing. And today's keynote speaker will be talking about such problems and how we can solve them. Today, there will be interesting and educational workshops held by speakers such as Dr. Charles McNeil, Esther Surden, and Sam Altman. There will be topics ranging from personal change and well-being to the real impact of foreign aid. 30 workshops are being held today by both innovative students and well-read adults around the globe. This summit will not only educate, motivate, and inspire, but will also give us hope that when the world reopens, it reopens in a way that is more connected, more empathetic, and more just. Ladies and gentlemen, we have great challenges before us, and together we will face them and make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil, for your inspiring speech. Before we introduce our keynote speaker, we would like to let participants know that the question function is now open. So if you have a question for our keynote speaker, please share those by typing them up in the question box. Our MUN at Home Secretary General, Jaydeep Singh, will be monitoring the questions and will facilitate the question and answer session at the conclusion of the presentation. Thank you.
We are honored to have Sam Altman as our keynote speaker for Day 2 of our inaugural event. Mr. Altman, the CEO and the co-founder of OpenAI, an artificial intelligence research and deployment company. He has also served as the president of Y Combinator, a company that invests billions of dollars into thousands of startups worldwide and is the leading startup accelerator. Before he was an entrepreneur, a successful businessman, and an industry leader in the field of AI, Mr. Altman was also a model UN delegate. Being a participant in THIMUN Hague allowed him to learn about systems thinking and how to develop a mindset, skills that he applies today in his own work. We are honored to have Mr. Altman joining us from California. And with that, I would like to yield the floor to Mr. Sam Altman.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for having me. Thank you, Mr. Newman, for inviting me. It is an honor to do this. So I wanted to talk just for a little bit. I'd like to mostly answer questions. I'm sure that'll be more interesting. But I wanted to talk about sort of like how I've observed people get things done in the world, how people make change. There's like obviously a long list of problems that people need to address. And you know, I've watched for a long time about how different people do them, and I've tried different ways myself. I remember seeing a long time ago, I think like back in high school, a poster which is like, you know, how to sort of have an impact. And it was like one of those 3 circle Venn diagrams, and the circles were what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you're passionate about. And it's sort of the intersection of all of those was how you were supposed to like make an impact on the world. And that always stuck with me. One of the things that I really learned in Model UN was that it's good to think big, but you have to understand all of the problem, and you have to understand the entire system and how it affects people's lives. And this is actually something that I think sounds obvious to say, and most people never learn, or at least they don't do. And in the process of like thinking about any of the problems faced in any of time Model UN, I would really try to first understand how the entire system works, who's affected, what the incentives are, kind of the full ecosystem. And this is still how I try to think of any big problem. This is something that I think is step 1. You can't skip this. Number 2 is I try to understand sort of where the highest leverage points on a problem are. For me, and this probably comes to like what I'm good at and what I'm passionate about, the answer is often about somehow using technology. I think I define technology very broadly, but the fact that humans have this superpower, which is we're really smart and we can invent new things, that's been really important to, I think, solving some of our biggest problems. And so if you can figure out the right new technology to invent, if you can understand, which is not always easy to do, the impact it'll have, that can do a lot. And then number 3 is I am a big believer that working with the best people, being able to influence the best people to work on something is the other sort of high leverage point. And so technology and people are the lenses that I look at the system through. And I made a list of problems when I was a freshman in college that I thought were really important. And that's kind of guided my career since. I thought it would change more than it has, but the first 2 on there were artificial intelligence and energy. And that's something that I've continued to do a lot. Another thing I learned at Model UN is that if you can sort of direct or influence the actions of a lot of people, that's a way to have a lot of change. And so a thing that I did for a long time was run Y Combinator, where we were able to fund like thousands of startups, many of which were working on some of the most critical problems in energy, healthcare, but also over time sort of in social policy as well. And that was a great thing to do. And I actually thought I was going to do that for a long time or for the rest of my career. And then at some point in there, because I got to, like one thing I got to do there was become chairman of a nuclear fusion company. And it was not obvious that that was what to work on, but sort of from a systems thinking approach and really kind of looking at the things that will have the biggest impact on, say, the poorest half of the world. I think if you can give everyone cheap, clean energy and a lot of it, that will have a transformative impact. And so that was something that I spent a lot of time, still spend a lot of time working with a fantastic company doing. I think it's also an example of just one new technological idea that can change a new system. But one of the things that I helped start while I was at Y Combinator was a company called OpenAI. And I got convinced that we're going to build a system pretty soon that is basically digital intelligence in a computer. And it will be smarter and more capable than a human in every way. And there's all like the fear mongering, which I think I understand and is valid about we're going to make Skynet and destroy the world, and that's really bad. But there's also this like, this will be the most powerful technology humans ever create. And how is that going to be used fairly and justly and equitably? And how is that going to make everyone's life better? And once we have this thing that can do things humans can't, how are we going to use it, for example, to address all of the sustainable development goals, which I think is totally possible. In fact, we thought this was such a big issue that we came up with a new corporate structure. This is another thing that I sort of was very Model UN inspired to make sure that the benefits of the technology and the governance of the technology could be widely shared and not fall victim to the sort of the standard corporate pressures. And yeah, so I've always tried to think about where the highest leverage points are that I'm good at, that I'm passionate about to make the biggest impact. And the thinking at Model UN has been surprisingly important to that and something that I've tried to stick with. And I would love to start answering questions, and I'll probably come back and talk about other things as I remember them.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. That was indeed a very inspiring speech from your side. I'd just like to introduce myself before we go into the Q&A. My name is Jaydeep Singh. I'm the Secretary General of the MUN at Home program at MUN Impact. And I'm honored to facilitate the question and answer session for you today. So we have a lot of questions coming in from the question box. So what essentially we will be doing is we will be taking these questions up. I'll be asking delegates to come up, unmute themselves and ask these questions. If that leads to some logistical issues, I'll ask the questions myself. And I also have a set of questions ready on my side as well to initiate some discussion on a more broader perspective. So before we begin, let's go into the questions we have. Quickly, I'm going to take up first some of the questions coming in from our delegates, and then we'll take up some more questions on broader perspectives. Here's a question from Ayomide. Ayomide is one of our delegates, and she also happens to be a press member. And this is a very interesting question and a very commonly asked question amongst today's tech-savvy youth. And she asks about how artificial intelligence, in your opinion, can be used to contribute to the sustainable development goals? Because this is something we really work about here at MUN Impact, and especially because their target is at 2030. So what do you think can be AI's role in the SDGs and in even in a more broader sense in future societies?
That's a question that we talk about a lot. I think AI will be a lot of things, but one thing it will be is a system that can reason across, at an expert level, across multiple domains. And that is something that there are not a lot of humans that can do because it's hard to be an expert in everything. And so I think some problems are just too difficult, or at least so far have been too difficult for humans to solve. But if we had better tools, then I think maybe we could. I really do believe that sort of humans work at the limit of their tools. And if the tools are much better, then we can do much better work. And so if we knew how to solve climate change, that's not just a technological issue. That is a policy issue. That is an economics issue that touches a lot of things. But if we knew how to do it in a good way, I believe that we would. And for example, I think AI can help us reason through those complicated issues and be able to do it. One thing that I think AI can do in the not distant future is to provide an incredible AI educator so that every student in the world can have a custom educator that will sort of be a companion to them throughout their educational career and help them learn sort of better than they've ever been able to before. I could give examples for everything, but I think this is an example. This is sort of the kinds of ways that AI will be able to help. We'll have better than human capacities to solve really hard problems.
Thank you, Mr. Altman, for that answer. Let's now go into another question asked by one of our delegates here. Unfortunately, I can't see their name here, but the question seems to be very interesting. I'd like to put it forth to you as well. Let's start talking about the youth and young students, particularly those in high school, transitioning in their senior years and going into university. They often are inquisitive about how they can engage in AI in their earlier years, develop a career in it, and maybe use it in their in the future in public service. So in your opinion, how can we start as young students to engage with artificial intelligence in a young age and then go on to develop a career in it over the future years?
It's definitely a field that I would recommend. You know, if I were graduating college or going into college now, it's definitely a field that would be at the very top of my list to consider. I think it's going to transform a lot of things. If you want to work on it technically, I would just start off studying basic computer science and then specialize over time in AI. And if you want to integrate it into other work, I would still try to study a little bit because I think technical foundations are just sort of helpful to understanding it. But I think there's great online courses to understand the basics. And I think there's tools like OpenAI just put one out recently called GPT-3, where you can begin to use these to address a lot of problems. In fact, I mentioned, we're talking about AI teachers. I've been amazed watching people just in the first few weeks since we released it, build some great educational products with our technology. So I would just do it. I would either study it technically or I would start playing around with it and thinking about where it can be applied. I think like many fields are fields where you can have a huge impact as a young person, but AI is one in particular. You know, some of our best researchers at OpenAI are straight out of college or college dropouts. People building great technology with this are even younger than that sometimes. So it's a good field for that.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. And there's a very interesting question coming in from one of our board directors as well. And this is something which I feel even our delegates would be interested in knowing. You know, we have seen a lot of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship and innovation coming in, not from those who have actually completed their high school, completed the university education completely, but rather from dropouts. And that kind of sort of starts reflecting on the fact that maybe we overvalue university education and maybe not the skill of it. So being a dropout yourself, what do you think your opinion would be on that? And what message would you like to give to the youth with regards to this?
I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer there. I would say I think everyone should make their own decision, but I don't think it is required to complete university anymore. When I dropped out, it was still sort of looked upon very badly, and people said it was going to negatively impact your career. And at this point, like, you know, basically all of the big tech companies, who I think are usually indicators of a trend, say they don't require a four-year education. They want to know if you have the skills for the job. I think there's a bunch of bad problems with the university system. And then on the other hand, I still think there's like many wonderful things, and you do learn a lot. So I would say it is, I think it's like a path, but certainly not the only path.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. So we'll now take up some more questions, and we've already talked about some of the positive effects of artificial intelligence. But here I have one of my colleagues at MUN Impact, that's Mohammed Mustafa, who happens to be our department head of global communications. And he's asked a very good question, which even I was thinking about. And that's, we often talk about the positive effects of artificial intelligence, but at the same time, there are some negative aspects to it. Primarily talking about, let's say, unemployment, and seeing that already it has reached high levels. The introduction of a new form of technology, which we all believe will be taking over the future in the coming years, could it not affect the job market more? And if so, what do you think could be the economic implications, and how could they be overcome? Now, this is a very broad, far-fetched question, but this is something we need to start maybe discussing on so that we can make plans for the future.
The changeover, the technologically driven changeover in jobs is much higher than most people realize. It's averaged about 50% every 75 years for the last several hundred. It is certainly punctuated by technological revolutions. I'd say there have been 3 great technological revolutions so far in history, and AI will be the 4th, and the first 3 were the agricultural, the industrial, and the computer revolution, and then many smaller ones. And if you think about around those big ones, how different the jobs looked on one side versus the other, the answer is very. And if you think about the smaller ones, it's somewhat. But But there have been predictions at each of those that there were just never going to be any more jobs, that we were all going to be working 4 hours a week and living a life of luxury. And it seems like we just work harder and harder. The human ambition and drive seems limitless. And I don't think we're going to run out of things to do. So I have no doubt that the jobs on the other side of the AI revolution are going to look very different than the jobs today. And I think it is as difficult to predict exactly what they'll look like as sort of they did before and after the computer revolution. Hard to imagine that computer programmers were one of the most important jobs before that. But I think there will be jobs, and I think one thing that I think is cool is that the jobs that exist will be one category of jobs that exist will be ones where people really want to interact with other humans. So there will be a huge premium on things like teachers and nurses and companions, and there will be a lot more capacity to do those, so people can have like much more one-on-one help with things like that. And so I think that like humans will do very human-centric jobs, and that's a wonderful thing. So I'm not that worried about this. What I'm more worried about is that AI leads to undue concentration of resources. And then there's like a very small number of people that can do anything at all. But assuming we can fix that, I think there will be lots of new things to do.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. So in line with trying to engage our audience as well, I'll be now calling upon our delegates who have asked questions to come up and ask their questions themselves. So I'm going to call out your name and I'll be unmuting you, and you can ask your question to Mr. Altman and then we can have the answer. So let's start off with Anna, who joins us from Singapore. So Anna has asked a question. Anna, you may go ahead.
Hi, so I was just wondering that since over the past couple of years and exactly like the last decade or two, our scientific and technological knowledge has definitely advanced a lot. Like 20 years ago, we would never have expected what we are seeing today. So how can we use that technology and AI genetic modifications in general to help with socioeconomic advancements and not just improving like fancy gadgets that are only open to some people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And this is something that we thought a lot about at OpenAI, because if we succeed, we will create something of value at a scale that the world has never seen before. And as I mentioned, like the one way I think this really badly goes wrong, or one of the ways it could go wrong, is if it unduly concentrates wealth and power. So what we all want is for this to be used to improve the lives of everyone. And I think it's not enough to just think about the technology, but you have to sort of design systems in which that technology will inherently benefit everybody. So like for OpenAI, for example, we designed something called a capped profit structure, where our investors and team could make a certain amount of money, but beyond that, it would flow equally to people in the world. And I think that's like a very important thing for companies working on transformative technology to do. The other thing about OpenAI is that we view ourselves in sort of three legs to the stool. We have research, engineering, where we build the systems to get them out in the world, and then policy, where we have a group of people who just think about how we use the technology for the most good, how we make sure that it's unbiased, how we make sure that everybody gets to benefit economically, how we use it to solve the biggest problems first. So the answer to a lot of these things is to just get the incentive system right. I think you can always have a lot of theories, and if you can just design the right incentive system, then that's the most powerful thing. Charlie Munger has this quote that I love, which is incentives are a superpower. And if you can spend time working on incentives, that's what you should do, because that's the highest point of leverage.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Anna. Let's now go on to another question from Sarah, who joins us from the UAE, whose question is somewhat related to the pandemic situation and how its relation to the AI comes about. So Sarah, I'm going to unmute you and you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, so my question is, Due to the current pandemic, we're starting to depend a lot more on machines and technology. So are we effectively speeding up the reliance on artificial intelligence?
One view of the pandemic is that it has been sort of a 10-year fast forward button for the world. And all of these societal trends that were happening happen much faster. Normally there's sort of this inertia, but now we're forced to change all at once. And some of those things are good, and some of those things wanted to happen more slowly, but here we are. So certainly the world is more reliant on technology. AI development, that, the research part of it, that kind of goes at the same pace. But there are new applications where people need it more now. And so it is probably existing technology is probably getting rolled out more quickly. I think that AI is going to affect the world so much and so deeply that, a little faster, a little slower is not a big deal. One of the things that people love to debate in Silicon Valley is what year is the AI going to wake up? Is it 10 years away, 30 years away, 50 years away, never going to happen? And it's I think sort of a somewhat silly question, because the fact that it's going to at all is one of these most important facts in human history. And, if it happens a little sooner or a little later, we should be spending a huge amount of societal effort today preparing for it. And on any of those timescales, I don't think we're spending nearly enough.
Thank you for the question. Let's now call upon Anvarul, who joins us from Bangladesh. His question pertains to the SDG on climate change and its relation to artificial intelligence. So Anvarul, I'm going to unmute you. Please go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question was like the worlds are fighting with climate change. I'm from Bangladesh, the country is facing with tremendous amount of climate change effect, within my locality. And I want to ask from you, Mr. Sam, how AI and AI technology can mitigate climate change problem in most affected countries by the climate change risk.
One of the first things that I hope we'll use very powerful AI systems for is helping us figure out how to solve climate change. This is a perfect example of a problem that is super complicated and runs on many different systems. So even if we had working nuclear fusion today, we sort of finally have a carbon-free energy source that can power the world and economically makes a ton of sense. How do we get that rolled out fast enough? How do we think through the regulations? How do we think through the sort of existing systems that are already deployed and getting those replaced, the economic incentives that you need for that? That's the kind of thing that I think AI can hopefully help us with. Or maybe there's some very different solution to that. But if humans knew how to do that, I think we could do it. I don't think we do, and so we haven't yet. And that's exactly the kind of complicated system that I hope AI will be able to help us with. And I think one of the very first things we should tackle.
Thank you, Anvarul, for your question. Let's now move on to another question coming in from Aditya, who's from Qatar. And his question again comes to the white-collar worker sector and how the white-collar worker sector, or even as on an extension to that, maybe the blue-collar sector could be affected by artificial intelligence in a more specific manner. So Aditya, I'm going to unmute you. Please go ahead with your question. Aditya?
Yes. So one of the major oppositions to AI is the overall reduction in white collar work, like how automation has been taking jobs away from blue collar workers. So how do you think this can be overcome, and what legislation, etc., do you think needs to be implemented?
I mean, it's gonna happen. Again, I don't think it ever, think it ever makes sense to pretend that it's not, or to try to sort of stop it, the technology, and say we just shouldn't build this because it's going to take away white-collar jobs. Like, technology happens. If technology can help us do something better, faster, and cheaper, it eventually happens. You can maybe delay it, but not stop it. And there will be a lot of white-collar work that does start to happen via AI. And there will also be tools so that people that are in those jobs can sort of now do 10 people's worth of jobs. Humans will get to do kind of the human part. They will have the AI do a lot of the parts of their jobs they're probably less excited about. But it is true, we will just need less people in some of those jobs. So you can either fight that or say, okay, well, now that we have these powerful tools, what is the human role to sort of still be a lawyer? And there will be one for sure, but it'll be sort of a different job. And people will adapt, they always do. Again, we've been through this so many times in human history. What it means to be a lawyer will change because there will be new tools. I think people used to probably say this when the first computers came out. It's going to have such an impact on the productivity of the field. What was going to happen? I think there is an interesting lesson to learn about this, though, which is when people first started talking about AI, they said, well, first it's going to come for blue-collar jobs with robots, self-driving trucks or whatever. Then second, it's going to come for white-collar jobs like doctors, but that's a long way off. And then the last thing that it's going to do, the most human of all, is creativity. And maybe it'll never kind of get to creativity. And predictions about the future are hard. And one of the surprises has been that it's gone the other way. The very first applications are around creativity, the ability to generate music, art, things like that, writing now. Second, it's able to take on like some of the white collar work. And third is robots are actually just really hard. The physical world's really hard. Our bodies are really quite amazing. And I think we're the longest way off from those. So yeah, the impact doesn't always go in the order you would think.
Thank you for the question. Let's now move on to just on that note. Let's taking that conversation forward. I agree with what you said, and I think all of us would be in concurrence when you say that technology happens, and that has happened in the past. It will happen in the future. We can't change that. But at the same time, if we are talking about uplifting poverty in general, or if we are talking about uplifting people from lower strata of society, then using AI, don't you think there should be a source of regulation to it? And in such a way that if we are regulating it, we are making sure that that segment of society isn't going hungry to bed at night, or maybe, losing their livelihood completely.
Yes, absolutely AI should be regulated. And also absolutely there should be enough redistribution of wealth that no one is going to bed hungry. And I think AI is going to force that question. And I think we're sort of actually not very far away from some sort of global basic income. But one of the things that we are trying to push is, given the speed at which this is all happening, and given how slowly coordinated global government action is, really trying to push to get the AI regulation conversation started now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Altman. There's a question coming in from one of our delegates on how the UN could actually be a role player in this regulation. So the question is that, do you think that the UN should appoint a special task force or a committee to deal with the dangerous forms of AI, or in general just regulate it in the future? I'm afraid the delegate's name isn't there in the list, so I can't call them off. But yeah, that's the question. I
definitely think so.
Right, great. Okay, so the next question, let's go on to Naduni, who's from Sri Lanka, about space mining and the role of AI there. So Naduni, I'm going to unmute you and you can go ahead with your question. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm gonna ask, do you think AI is beneficial in space mining and other aerospace related activity in future, and how could it would be beneficial if so?
Space mining is like landing a probe on on an asteroid and mining the minerals and shooting them back to Earth or something?
Yeah.
Yes, although I think you could probably do that without AI. I suspect we kind of have enough technology and we're good enough at building robots to mine and refine that we could probably do that. It might, yeah, I'm sure it would have some impact on that. It's, you know, for all people talk about it, it's not a field that I've looked into in great depth, but I do think there are probably going to be some elements that we need a lot more of, and maybe asteroids are a good place to get them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Just a very interesting question coming in from some of our delegates there, and I'll just collectively ask that to you. We've had this privacy debate going on for a very long time on our social media platforms, and you know, all our the artificial intelligence in the present scenario. So in the future, how do you think this breach of privacy, which is, you know, a cause of concern amongst the wider community, could actually be countered, or what steps are being taken? Is there any kind of consideration to this, that okay, in future projects we need to really step up our game with regards to privacy?
I think we need to really start fighting for privacy and explaining why it's important now. One of the things I worry about with AI is that AI will have such power to have some positive impacts on the world by looking at everyone's data, that there will be, I worry, a strong case to say we should give up all privacy to the AI so that we can have this better world. And I think it's like a fundamental human right, and it's not worth the trade. And I expect there to be a lot of pressure in that direction. And so in the same way we just defend, you know, the importance of free expression to a healthy society, I think we need to start talking about privacy in the same way.
Great. Thank you so much. Going into another question coming in from our delegates. Let's go to Mohammed, who joins us from the UAE. Mohammed, I'm going to unmute you and you can go ahead with your question. Yes. Go ahead, Mohammed.
To what degree do you believe that AI could transform education and in-classroom activity?
Great question. That's one of the areas that I'm most excited about. I think today we already have technology that is good enough that if we apply it correctly, we can transform education. And that's one of the projects that is so important that OpenAI is going to work on it ourselves. So I think you can imagine that every learner gets an AI tutor perfectly matched for them, that learns how they learn, learns what they're interested in, knows what they know, and helps them to learn any subject in the perfect way for them. And that can be a companion with them all the way through their educational career. So I'm very excited about that. And I think that's not a future thing. That's something we can start working on now. I think that's going to be a big deal.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. And just before we conclude the Q&A, just the last final question to just set the tone before we leave. What do you think is the major problem we have with AI today? And what do you think could be the future beyond artificial intelligence, if there is one? And because as you said, technology just happens. So
I could answer that, but if this is the last question, could I go through and just do a speed round of what's in the Q&A box? Because there's so many good questions in there and I can just touch on a few of them.
Go ahead.
All right, so I'll just do this for we have 3 minutes left or something?
Absolutely fine.
How much time do we have left?
You can take about 5 or 10 minutes.
5 minutes, all right, I'll do this for 5. So I'm just gonna go in order down here because again, I think these questions are really good. Am I as scared as Elon about AI taking over the world? You know, we talk about that a lot, Elon and I. I think he is more afraid than I am, but we're both afraid. It's this balance between like, it's going to make the future unimaginably wonderful or be a disaster and sort of, you know, somehow destroy the world. The more I work on it technically, the more I think it's gonna be good. We've made more progress on the control problems and the alignment problems than I thought. But it still is going to be a very powerful tool where humans have the potential for intentional misuse at levels they've never had before. Again, we've been through this before with things like nukes where the technological landscape changes quickly. I think it is right to be scared. I think it is right to think about the downsides a lot and work as hard as we can to prevent them. But I think that I feel more optimistic now, technically, about building this. And I am most worried about someone intentionally misusing the power. How can we ensure that AI does not cause people to lose their jobs? We can't. There is no way to do that. We can help them find new jobs. We can make sure that the new economy is fairer and better. But yeah, some jobs are going to change. That one we sort of already touched on. A field where AI would be surprisingly helpful. Actually, one that I'll throw out is I think it's going to transform coding. I think AI is going to be really great soon at generating code. And this advice that people have been giving that everybody should learn to code is going to, in another year or 2 years, look like bad advice. And anybody will be able to create programs, and it'll be like 100 times easier, 1,000 times easier than it was before. How reliable is AI? We talk a lot about this. We actually have a team called the reliability team. Getting AI to not be toxic, not be biased, not lie, answer the right question, do what you think it's going to do. This is an area of active research. We're making good progress. Before these systems are deployed to the world in big ways, this is really important. We answered those. AI has so many great purposes, but is it worth the money and the loss of jobs? I think AI is going to make poverty go way down, not go way up. I think that AI will have a transformatively positive economic impact on the world, and there will be whole new classes of much better jobs than exist today. I also think, like, eventually we're going to create this sort of new life form that's going to go off and colonize the universe, and that's a cool thing. That's something that we should be proud of as humans. Providing cheap and clean energy may make countries lose their main source of income through oil. Yeah, that is going to happen. That needs to happen. I think, fortunately, many countries in the oil economy understand this and are the most thoughtful about the systems that are going to replace the oil economy, and are most investing in new energy technologies and will be major players there. So I think that's actually exactly the right approach, saying, okay, this is going to change, it needs to change. But whatever's coming next, let's make sure that we get to capture some of that value.
Altman, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but with time. Really, thank you so much for answering all those questions. It's been a fun ride, and we really hope our delegates had a great time with those questions and your presentation. Thank you so much. And that's all from my side. I hand it over to Maria to take off the proceedings. Thank you so much.
So, Mr. Altman, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We cannot describe how much we appreciate you taking your time to attend our summit and speak at our plenary session. Your words on something that is incredibly relevant at this point in time were enlightening. Thank you for your contribution at the Global Summit. And we would also like to thank Jaydeep tremendously for facilitating the Q&A.
Thank you.
I think that concludes today's plenary session. Thank you all so much for attending. And thank you so much, Mr. Altman, for your talk. We all thoroughly enjoyed that. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Yeah.
Can I share something really quickly with everyone? I think you all can relate as MUN delegates. This is our very own Sam Altman as a THIMUN delegate in, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, 2002?
Sounds right.
As a representative of the Netherlands for John Burroughs School, at the advisory panel, the approval panel, and speaking at the podium. And there is one picture, Sam, that I could not find, and I do remember. And as we were walking in the streets of Den Haag, you stopped by a car and were just wrapping your arms around it as if it was the coolest thing in the world. Do you remember which car that was?
I think a smart car.
It was, in fact, a smart car. And it was the technology, the architecture, I mean, everything about it, the design, you just loved it. And you just wanted to share everything about it with the group. And you had the foresight to know that this was the future. It's just so cool. So thank you, Sam, for being with us today.
Thank you.